In 1994, a movie came out that the studio didn't fully understand. The director was told to cut it. The lead actor almost walked off set. And buried inside the film were real ancient codes that actual archaeologists are still arguing about today. Most people think they watched a sci-fi blockbuster. But here is what they actually watched. And it is stranger than anything Hollywood ever admitted. Let's go back to the beginning. And not the glossy, press release version. The real version. It was 1992. Roland Emmerich and Dean Devlin, two guys who Hollywood had not fully taken seriously yet, walked into a room with a script that sounded absolutely insane. Ancient Egypt. A portal to another galaxy. Gods that were actually aliens. A military operation that nobody was supposed to know about. The studio executives sat there in silence. And not the kind of silence that meant they loved it. According to a 1994 interview with Devlin published in Starlog magazine, the initial pitch was rejected by nearly every major studio in Hollywood. Not once. Not twice. Multiple times. The idea was considered too weird, too expensive, and too risky for mainstream audiences. Think about that for a second. The movie that went on to gross over $196 million worldwide, on a budget of just $55 million, was almost never made at all. But here is where it gets darker. Even after Carolco Pictures agreed to back the film, the problems did not stop. They multiplied. The script went through rewrites that Emmerich and Devlin absolutely hated. Studio notes kept coming in asking them to make it more conventional. More explainable. Less weird. Devlin later told Entertainment Weekly that there were serious conversations about removing the entire ancient alien angle from the story. Can you imagine? Stargate without the alien gods angle is just a war movie with a funny door. They fought to keep their vision intact. Hard. And the casting process? Nobody reported what actually happened there. Kurt Russell was not the first choice for Colonel Jack O'Neill. There were names floating around that would shock you. Names from a very different genre of Hollywood. The role almost went in a completely different direction, one that would have made the entire tone of the film unrecognizable. James Spader as Daniel Jackson was also considered a strange choice by the studio. He was known for quiet, intellectual roles. The executives wanted someone with more obvious action, hero energy. Spader pushed back. He reportedly told the producers he wanted to play Daniel as a man the world had given up on. That single character choice became the emotional heartbeat of the entire movie. Before I go further, I need to ask you something. Did you grow up watching Stargate, or did you discover it later? And do you think Hollywood would ever have the guts to make something this original today? Drop your answer in the comments right now. I genuinely read every single one. The film was shot in just 71 days. For a production of that scale, massive desert sets, thousands of extras, groundbreaking visual effects, that is almost impossibly fast. Crew members later described the shoot as controlled chaos. One set designer told a convention panel in 2004 that they were building scenes hours before filming them. And somewhere in the middle of all that chaos, something made it onto screen that the producers have never fully explained. In 1994, a movie came out that the studio didn't fully understand. The director was told to cut it. The lead actor almost walked off set. And buried inside the film were real ancient codes that actual archaeologists are still arguing about today. Most people think they watched a sci-fi blockbuster. But here is what they actually watched. And it is stranger than anything Hollywood ever admitted. Let's go back to the beginning. And not the glossy, press release version. The real version. It was 1992. Roland Emmerich and Dean Devlin, two guys who Hollywood had not fully taken seriously yet, walked into a room with a script that sounded absolutely insane. Ancient Egypt. A portal to another galaxy. Gods that were actually aliens. A military operation that nobody was supposed to know about. The studio executives sat there in silence. And not the kind of silence that meant they loved it. According to a 1994 interview with Devlin published in Starlog magazine, the initial pitch was rejected by nearly every major studio in Hollywood. Not once. Not twice. Multiple times. The idea was considered too weird, too expensive, and too risky for mainstream audiences. Think about that for a second. The movie that went on to gross over $196 million worldwide, on a budget of just $55 million, was almost never made at all. But here is where it gets darker. Even after Carolco Pictures agreed to back the film, the problems did not stop. They multiplied. The script went through rewrites that Emmerich and Devlin absolutely hated. Studio notes kept coming in asking them to make it more conventional. More explainable. Less weird. Devlin later told Entertainment Weekly that there were serious conversations about removing the entire ancient alien angle from the story. Can you imagine? Stargate without the alien gods angle is just a war movie with a funny door. They fought to keep their vision intact. Hard. And the casting process? Nobody reported what actually happened there. Kurt Russell was not the first choice for Colonel Jack O'Neill. There were names floating around that would shock you. Names from a very different genre of Hollywood. The role almost went in a completely different direction, one that would have made the entire tone of the film unrecognizable. James Spader as Daniel Jackson was also considered a strange choice by the studio. He was known for quiet, intellectual roles. The executives wanted someone with more obvious action hero energy. Spader pushed back. He reportedly told the producers he wanted to play Daniel as a man the world had given up on. That single character choice became the emotional heartbeat of the entire movie. Before I go further, I need to ask you something. Did you grow up watching Stargate, or did you discover it later? And do you think Hollywood would ever have the guts to make something this original today? Drop your answer in the comments right now. I genuinely read every single one. The film was shot in just 71 days. For a production of that scale, massive desert sets, thousands of extras, groundbreaking visual effects, that is almost impossibly fast. Crew members later described the shoot as controlled chaos. One set designer told a convention panel in 2004 that they were building scenes hours before filming them. And somewhere in the middle of all that chaos, something made it onto screen that the producers have never fully explained. Now here is where the story gets really interesting. Because the weird facts were not just behind the camera. They were right there on screen the whole time. And almost nobody noticed. The cast secrets and on-set drama of Stargate 1994 are the kind of thing that film school professors still whisper about. Kurt Russell showed up to set with a specific idea of who Jack O'Neill was. And it was not the idea that Emmerich had. Russell wanted O'Neill darker. Quieter. A man with a death wish so deep that no amount of action could cover it up. In the original script, O'Neill was written with some humor. Some lightness. Russell stripped almost all of it away. He told the director in a private conversation, later recounted in a 2009 DVD commentary, that he wanted the audience to feel genuinely uncertain whether O'Neill wanted to make it home alive. That tension you feel watching Russell in that film? That was not just acting. That was a battle between an actor and a director playing out in real time on screen. And it made the movie better. But here is what nobody reported. Russell and Emmerich clashed so hard during production that there were days when communication between them went through the producer. Not directly. Through an intermediary. On a 71-day shoot with no room for delays. Think about what that means for the energy on set. Now add James Spader to that picture. Spader, who according to multiple crew interviews collected in the 2004 fan documentary Stargate: The Secret Files, spent hours each day in the makeup chair not just getting his Daniel Jackson look right but researching real Egyptology. Real hieroglyphics. Real ancient language theory. He wanted every single hand gesture, every facial reaction to feel like it came from a man who had actually spent his life studying this material. The studio thought this level of preparation was excessive. Spader did not care. And then there was Jay Davidson. The actor cast as R.A. the film's villain. And this casting decision is one of the strangest and most brilliant choices in 1990s Hollywood. Davidson had only appeared in one film before Stargate. That film was The Crying Game. Davidson was not a trained actor in the traditional sense. Was not looking for a Hollywood career. Was reportedly reluctant to take the role at all. According to a 1994 profile in the Face magazine, Davidson agreed to do Stargate only after being offered a fee so large it was considered shocking for a relatively unknown performer at the time. The number that circulated on set was $1 million. For a supporting villain role. In 1994. The gamble paid off in a way nobody predicted. Davidson's R.A. is genuinely unsettling in a way that most Hollywood villains simply are not. There is something deeply alien about the performance that no amount of directing could have manufactured. It had to come from someone who was truly outside the system. Wait. Before I tell you what happened next, because this next part is something 99% of people never heard, make sure you are subscribed. This channel covers the stories mainstream media is too scared to touch. Hit subscribe. I will wait. The on-set tension did not end with the cast. The extras used for the Abydos population scenes numbered in the thousands. Many were recruited locally during the Arizona and California desert shoots. And according to a grip who worked the production and later spoke at a 2011 fan convention in London, something happened during one of the large crowd scenes that shut down filming for an entire afternoon. Nobody from the official production has ever acknowledged it publicly. The details that came out through crew accounts describe a moment of genuine panic involving one of the practical effect sequences. What exactly happened has never been confirmed. But 3 separate crew members told the same story independently. And that story involves a prop that was never supposed to be on set that day. The bizarre real-world theories that inspired the Stargate script are the part of this story that the mainstream press completely ignored. And honestly, that is not surprising. Because once you go down this rabbit hole, you start to wonder whether Emmerich and Devlin were making a sci-fi movie at all. Or whether they were doing something far more deliberate. Far more calculated. And far stranger than anything they ever admitted in a press junket. Here's what most people stopped at. The headline version. 2 filmmakers had a cool idea about ancient Egypt and aliens and made a fun blockbuster. That is the surface. That is the version the studio was comfortable selling. But here is what the media buried. The actual intellectual foundation of the Stargate script was pulled almost directly from a body of fringe archaeology and alternative history literature that was considered deeply controversial in academic circles at the time. The primary source that Devlin has danced around in interviews without ever fully naming is a lineage of theory stretching back to Zecharia Sitchin. Sitchin was a scholar and author who spent decades arguing that ancient Sumerian texts described extraterrestrial beings called the Anunnaki who came to Earth and genetically engineered humanity. His books, including The 12th Planet published in 1976, were dismissed by mainstream Egyptologists and archaeologists. But they sold millions of copies. And they clearly landed on the desk of at least one Hollywood screenwriter. The fingerprints are everywhere in the film. The idea that R.A. is not a god but an alien who arrived on Earth thousands of years ago and used humans as a slave labor force. The idea that the pyramids were not tombs but functional structures built for a specific technological purpose. The idea that hieroglyphics contained a second layer of meaning that conventional archaeology refused to acknowledge. These are not random sci-fi inventions. These are Sitchin's arguments dressed in Hollywood clothes. And here is where it gets even more interesting. In 1993, a year before Stargate was released, a book called The Orion Mystery by Robert Bauval and Adrian Gilbert was published to enormous controversy. That book argued with detailed astronomical evidence that the layout of the 3 Giza pyramids perfectly mirrors the 3 belt stars of the Orion constellation. The alignment is not approximate. According to Bauval's calculations, it is precise to a degree that cannot be explained by accident. Mainstream Egyptologists attacked the theory immediately. But the timing of that book's publication and the release of Stargate is not something you can easily dismiss. The film directly uses the concept of stellar cartography and star map navigation as a central plot mechanic. Daniel Jackson does not find the Stargate by reading hieroglyphics the conventional way. He finds it by looking at the stars. By treating the ancient symbols as an astronomical map rather than a religious text. That is Bauvel's theory in screenplay form. According to a 2019 retrospective piece in Ancient Origins magazine, several researchers who study the overlap between alternative archaeology and popular culture have pointed to Stargate as the single most influential mainstream vehicle for these fringe ideas ever produced. More influential than any documentary. More influential than any book. Because it reached $196 million worth of audience. And it planted a question in the minds of an entire generation. What if the experts are wrong? What if the pyramids are something we do not fully understand yet? And here is the part that nobody warned them about. Some of the real archaeologists and Egyptologists who were consulted during the pre-production of Stargate later expressed deep discomfort about how their input was used. According to correspondence cited in a 2001 academic paper on Hollywood and archaeology published in the Journal of Egyptian Archaeology, at least 2 consultants felt their contributions were twisted to serve a narrative that undermined legitimate historical scholarship. One consultant reportedly asked to have their name removed from the credits entirely. The request was denied. And somewhere in the gap between what those consultants believed and what ended up on screen lies one of the most fascinating tensions in 1990s cinema history. Nobody talks about the hidden symbols and codes buried inside Stargate the way they should. Because on the surface it looks like production design. It looks like an art department doing their job. Making things look ancient and impressive and cinematic. But when you start pulling at the threads, something very different appears underneath. And once you see it, you genuinely cannot unsee it. The production designer for Stargate was Holger Gross. And Gross did not just make things look Egyptian. He made things look specifically and deliberately accurate to a version of ancient Egyptian symbolism that goes far deeper than anything you would find in a standard history textbook. According to a detailed analysis published in the Journal of Popular Film and Television in 1997, the hieroglyphic panels visible throughout the film contain actual translatable ancient Egyptian text. Not fake movie gibberish. Real text. And some of what that text says has never been publicly translated or discussed in any official making of material. Think about that for a second. There are words carved into the walls of a Hollywood movie set that the production never explained and the studio never addressed. One sequence in particular during Daniel Jackson's first exploration of the pyramid interior contains a wall inscription that Egyptology students have since identified as a modified version of a real funerary text from the Book of the Dead. Specifically a passage related to the opening of gates between worlds. Between the living and the dead. Between this realm and another. The filmmakers never confirmed this was intentional. They never denied it either. But here is where the story takes a dark turn. The circular Stargate device itself was not designed from pure imagination. Emmerich and Devlin worked with concept artists who pulled from a very specific and very real source. The design of the gate with its rotating inner track, its chevron locking system and its central water-like event horizon was heavily influenced by descriptions found in obscure 19th century esoteric literature. Specifically literature connected to Freemasonic and Rosicrucian traditions that described metaphysical doorways or portals using remarkably similar symbolic language. A 2003 essay by researcher and author John Lash published in a collected volume on esoteric symbolism in cinema draws direct visual comparisons between the Stargate device and diagrams found in 18th century European occult manuscripts. The number of chevrons on the gate. The circular nature of the device. The activation sequence that requires specific coordinates rather than a simple on and off switch. These details align with portal symbolism from esoteric traditions in ways that are too specific to dismiss as coincidence. And then there is the RA headdress. J. Davidson's costume as RA was designed by Joseph Porro. And Porro has spoken in interviews about the deliberate layering of symbolic meaning into every element of the villain's appearance. The sun disk. The cobra. The specific gold tones chosen. These were not random aesthetic choices. According to Poirot in a 1994 interview with Cinefantastique magazine, each element was researched against actual ancient Egyptian religious iconography with a level of precision that went far beyond what the camera would ever fully capture. But here is what the media buried. Several of the symbols incorporated into Ra's throne room set pieces are not Egyptian in origin at all. They come from a completely different ancient tradition. One that predates the Egyptian empire by thousands of years. Researchers who have analyzed high-resolution stills from the film have identified iconographic elements traceable to ancient Sumerian and Mesopotamian visual language. The same tradition that Zecharia Sitchin spent his career arguing was connected to extraterrestrial contact. And honestly, this part of the story hit me hard. Because how many of us have trusted the version of history we were handed without ever questioning it? How many of us have accepted what we were taught and never looked behind the curtain? Stargate's story is not just about ancient aliens or Hollywood drama. It is about the possibility that the official story is never the whole story. Tell me in the comments, have you ever looked into something you were taught as fact and discovered the real version was completely different? The studio war that nearly erased Stargate from history is the chapter of this story that Hollywood has never wanted to tell cleanly. Because it involves money. It involves ego. And it involves a level of corporate dysfunction that makes the on-set drama between Kurt Russell and Roland Emmerich look like a minor disagreement. Here is the background that most people never got. Carolco Pictures, the company that agreed to finance and produce Stargate, was not in good shape when they greenlit the film. They were hemorrhaging money. They had just come off a string of enormously expensive productions that had underperformed at the box office. Terminator 2 had been a massive hit, but the cost of making it had been equally massive. Cliffhanger. Last Action Hero. These were films that either broke even or lost money for the studio. And by 1993, when Stargate was deep in production, Carolco was circling a financial drain that everyone in Hollywood could see except apparently the people running Carolco. According to reporting from Variety and The Hollywood Reporter, throughout 1994 and 1995, Carolco was in active financial crisis during the entire post-production period of Stargate. This means that the editing, the visual effects finishing, the sound design, the musical score by David Arnold, which is now considered one of the greatest adventure film scores of the 1990s. All of it was being completed inside a company that was quietly falling apart. Emmerich and Devlin have spoken in various interviews over the years about the suffocating pressure of that period. There were genuine moments where the release of the film was uncertain. Not because the film was bad, but because the company releasing it might not survive long enough to put it in theaters. And here is where it gets worse. Because Carolco was not the only power player fighting over Stargate. MGM and Artisan Entertainment were both circling the distribution rights in ways that created confusion and conflict about who actually controlled the film. The distribution deal that eventually got Stargate into theaters was described by one entertainment lawyer familiar with the negotiations as one of the messiest rights situations he had seen in a decade of Hollywood deal making. That messiness had real consequences. The marketing budget for Stargate was significantly lower than it should have been for a film of its scale. According to a 1994 analysis in The Hollywood Reporter, the promotional spend on Stargate was roughly half of what a comparable studio release would have received at the time. Half. That means the movie that grossed $196 million worldwide did it with one hand tied behind its back. Imagine what those numbers look like with a full marketing campaign behind them. But wait. It gets worse. The version of Stargate that was released in American theaters in October 1994 was not the version that Emmerich wanted audiences to see. The studio had mandated cuts. Significant ones. Scenes that provided deeper context for the Abydos civilization. Scenes that expanded on the backstory of Ra's arrival on Earth. A subplot involving Daniel Jackson's emotional breakdown that Spader had reportedly considered some of his finest work on the film. All of it cut. All of it sitting in a vault somewhere. And here is the fact that should make every Stargate fan genuinely angry. The extended version of the film that Emmerich has referred to in interviews over the years has never been officially released. Not on VHS. Not on DVD. Not on any streaming platform. A version of one of the most influential sci-fi films of the 1990s that contains scenes the director considers essential to the story exists somewhere. And the rights situation surrounding Stargate has been so complicated for so long that getting that version released has proven functionally impossible. According to a 2018 interview with Devlin in Den of Geek, the rights to the original Stargate film have passed through so many corporate hands over the decades that even the people who made it struggle to get clear answers about who controls what. The movie that launched a television franchise that ran for over a decade. The movie that spawned Stargate SG-1, which became one of the longest-running sci-fi series in American television history. That movie exists in a legal and corporate tangle that its own creators cannot fully untangle. And somewhere in that tangle is a cut of the film that nobody alive today has seen since 1994. The legacy secret. The thing the producers have never fully admitted. This is the part of the Stargate story that ties everything together. And it is the part that changes how you see not just the movie but the entire cultural moment it created. Here's what most people know. Stargate 1994 spawned a television franchise. Stargate SG-1 premiered in 1997 and ran for 10 seasons, making it one of the longest-running sci-fi series in American television history at the time. Then came Stargate Atlantis. Then Stargate Universe. A franchise that kept millions of fans engaged for nearly 2 decades. That is the official legacy. That is the version everyone agrees on. But here is what the media buried. The relationship between Emmerich and Devlin and the television franchise that used their creation was not a happy one. It was not collaborative. It was not celebratory. It was a slow-burning conflict that lasted years and left wounds that have never fully healed. When MGM decided to develop Stargate SG-1, they did not bring Emmerich and Devlin into the process in any meaningful creative way. According to a 2005 interview with Devlin in Sci-Fi Wire, he and Emmerich learned about the development of the television series essentially the same way the public did. Through announcements. They were not consulted. They were not invited to be creative partners. They were the people who created the universe that somebody else was now building inside. Think about that for a second. You create a world. You fight for it against studio resistance. You make it against impossible odds on a chaotic 71-day shoot. You watch it become a cultural phenomenon. And then someone else takes that world and builds a decade-long franchise inside it without ever really asking you how it should work. Devlin has described this situation in interviews with a kind of controlled sadness that is more devastating than anger would be. He talked about watching SG-1 and recognizing the bones of what he and Emmerich had built while feeling completely disconnected from what was being built on top of those bones. But here is where it gets even more interesting. Because Emmerich and Devlin did not just accept this situation quietly. For years they developed their own vision for where the Stargate story should go. A direct sequel to the 1994 film. Their version. Not the television version. A continuation of the original story with the original tone and the original mythology intact. According to a 2014 interview with Devlin in The Hollywood Reporter, they had a complete plan for a Stargate trilogy. 3 films. Beginning, middle and end. A full arc for Daniel Jackson and Jack O'Neill that would have answered every question the original film left open. They pitched it. Multiple times. To multiple studios. And the rights situation that had been tangled since the Carolco collapse made it nearly impossible to move forward. Every time they got close, something in the corporate ownership chain created a new obstacle. A 2016 report in Deadline Hollywood confirmed that a reboot of the Stargate film franchise was in active development at MGM with Emmerich attached. But here is what nobody reported fully. The version Emmerich was developing was not a reboot in the traditional sense. According to sources close to the production speaking to IO9 in 2016, Emmerich's plan was to essentially ignore the television franchise entirely. To treat the original 1994 film as the only canonical starting point and build forward from there as if SG-1 and Atlantis and universe had never existed. That decision was not just creative. It was personal. It was Emmerich drawing a line in the sand and saying, "This is mine. This is what we built. And this is the version that deserves to continue." The project stalled. Then stalled again. The rights situation remained a maze. And as of the most recent public reporting, the Stargate film continuation that Emmerich and Devlin have been trying to make for over a decade remains unmade. A story that was almost never told in 1994 is now a sequel that may never be told at all. And the saddest fact of everything you have heard today is this. James Spader has said publicly that he would return to play Daniel Jackson. Kurt Russell has never fully closed the door either. The cast is willing. The creators are willing. The vision exists. And somewhere between the corporate machinery and the rights labyrinth and the Hollywood politics that have surrounded this property for 30 years, the movie that millions of fans have been waiting for sits frozen. Waiting. Like a gate that nobody can figure out how to dial. For 30 years, Stargate 1994 has been sitting in plain sight, hiding secrets that most people never thought to look for. The studio battles. The hidden symbols. The fringe theories baked into the script. The cast conflicts that made the film better by accident. The corporate war that almost buried it before it opened. And the legacy fight that continues to this day between the people who built this world and the machine that profits from it. This movie is not just a sci-fi classic. It is a story about what happens when genuine vision collides with institutional resistance. And somehow, against every odd, the vision won. At least once. But here is what I did not tell you yet. There is a part of this story, one final secret, that connects directly to what happened when the Stargate television producers made a decision in Season 8 of SG-1 that Emmerich has never publicly forgiven them for. I am covering that in my next video. It is already uploaded. Go watch it right now. The link is on your screen.